Get up right now, you filth. Who gave you permission to sit in my husband's chair? Victoria Sterling's voice sliced through the ambient jazz of the gilded gala like a serrated knife. She stood over table one in a blood-red designer gown that cost more than most people's cars, her neck weighed down by diamonds that sparkled under the crystal chandeliers. Julian Thorne did not flinch. He sat in the velvet chair scrolling through a financial report on his phone, wearing an impeccably tailored white suit that glowed against his dark skin. He slowly raised his eyes to meet hers. "Excuse me. Don't you excuse me, you help." Victoria hissed, her manicured hand trembling with rage. "This table is for the elite. It is for the people who own this city, not the people who clean it." Before Julian could utter a single word of explanation, Victoria grabbed a crystal goblet filled with vintage 1982 Cabernet Sauvignon. With a sneer of pure disgust, she hurled the dark liquid straight into his face. The red wine splashed against Julian's skin and soaked instantly into the pristine white fabric of his jacket, dripping down his chest like an open wound. The entire ballroom gasped. The music stopped. "You are polluting my air." Victoria slammed the empty glass onto the table, satisfied by the destruction. "Go back to the ghetto where you belong." She stood there, triumphant, chest heaving, completely unaware that she had just made a fatal calculation. Because the man sitting in that chair wasn't a janitor. He wasn't a driver. And that splash of wine didn't just ruin a suit. It had just cost her family exactly $1.5 billion. Have you ever watched someone destroy their entire life in 5 seconds because they were too arrogant to see who was really sitting in front of them? Let's rewind 2 minutes to understand the magnitude of this disaster. Victoria was already on edge. Her husband, Preston Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Corp., was currently sweating through his tuxedo in the lobby. Their family empire was crumbling. 3 failed tech launches and a massive lawsuit had bled their accounts dry. Tonight was their Hail Mary. They needed a cash injection to survive until morning, or the banks would seize everything. Their only hope was a mysterious investor from Titan Ventures, a man known for saving sinking ships if the leadership showed promise. Victoria gripped her clutch, her knuckles white. Preston had told her to be charming. He told her to be perfect. But when she arrived at the VIP table, the table reserved for the saviors of their legacy, she didn't see a savior. She saw Julian. And in Victoria's world, a young black man sitting alone at the head table could only be one thing: an intruder, a mistake, someone who had slipped past security to steal a moment of luxury he didn't earn. Julian sat perfectly still. The wine dripped from his chin onto the white tablecloth, staining it crimson. He didn't jump up. He didn't shout. He didn't call her names. He simply took a deep breath, the smell of expensive grapes and blind hatred filling his nose. This silence infuriated Victoria even more. In her mind, his lack of reaction was insolence. It was defiance. "Look at you." She laughed, a cold, sharp sound that echoed in the silent room. "You are just sitting there soaking wet. Do you expect me to apologize? Do you expect a handout for dry cleaning?" She snapped her fingers in the air, the sound loud and entitled. "Manager, get over here now. We have a security breach." The floor manager, a nervous man named David, rushed over, his eyes widening as he saw the wine dripping from the guest at table 1. "Mrs. Sterling, what happened?" "What happened is that you let this riffraff wander in from the street." Victoria pointed a diamond-encrusted finger at Julian. "Look at him. He probably stole that suit. It doesn't even fit him right. Get him out of my sight before I call the police and have him arrested for trespassing." The surrounding tables were filled with New York's financial elite, old money, hedge fund managers, tech tycoons. They all turned to look, hundreds of pairs of eyes fixed on Julian. They saw a black man covered in wine sitting silently while a wealthy white woman screamed about theft. The whispers began immediately. "How did he get in here? Is he a waiter? He must be drunk. Someone should really check his pockets." The humiliation was thick and suffocating. It was designed to break him. It was designed to make him lower his head, apologize for existing, and scurry away to the back entrance. But Julian Thorne had not built Titan Ventures by running away. He had built it by observing people exactly like Victoria Sterling and letting them dig their own graves. Julian finally moved. His movements were slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly calm. He reached for a linen napkin, unfolding it with precision. He dabbed the wine from his forehead. He wiped the lenses of his glasses, checking them against the light before placing them back on his face. Then he looked at the small gold placard sitting on the table directly in front of him. Mrs. Sterling. Julian's voice was a deep, steady baritone that carried across the hushed room without him needing to shout. He tapped a long finger on the placard. This seat is reserved for Titan Ventures. It is reserved for the managing partner who holds the paperwork your husband has been begging for all week. He looked up at her, his eyes unreadable behind the lenses. Are you absolutely certain you want me to stand up? Victoria froze for a split second. Her eyes darted to the placard. Titan Ventures. But then she looked back at Julian. She looked at his skin. She looked at his youth. And her prejudice overrode her logic. Her brain could not compute that the man in front of her was the power broker. She laughed again, harder this time, fueled by the adrenaline of the crowd watching her. Oh, that is rich. That is absolutely hilarious. She leaned in close, her expensive perfume cloying and suffocating. You think because you can read a sign you belong here, you think I am stupid. She turned to the crowd, seeking their validation. He thinks he is the partner. Can you believe the audacity? She turned back to Julian, her face twisting into a mask of cruelty. Listen to me carefully, boy. I do not care who you drive for. I do not care if the partner sent you here to hold his seat while he parks the car. I do not care if you are his assistant, his intern, or his pet. She grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles straining. This seat is for people who sign checks, not people who cash them. This seat is for the people who decide if my husband's company lives or dies. And you. She sneered, looking him up and down. You look like the only thing you decide is paper or plastic. Julian remained seated. He didn't blink. He just watched her, analyzing her, cataloging every insult like line items on a balance sheet. So you are refusing to let me sit here? Julian asked, his voice dangerously soft. Even though my invitation matches the name on this table, I am refusing to let you breathe the same air as my family. Victoria saw a plate of appetizers sitting untouched near Julian's elbow. Shrimp cocktail with a thick red cocktail sauce. Without thinking, fueled by the need to physically remove him from her space, she shoved the plate. It wasn't a subtle push. It was a violent shove. The plate slid across the smooth tablecloth and crashed into Julian's chest. The cocktail sauce splattered over the wine stain, adding a thick red sludge to the mess on his white lapel. A shrimp bounced off his shoulder and landed on the floor. There, Victoria smiled, breathless. Now you match. Trash covered in garbage. She straightened up, smoothing her dress, looking at the manager who was trembling with indecision. Get him out, David. Or do I need to call the owner and tell him you are letting vagrants harass his VIP guests? Julian looked down at the sauce on his jacket. He picked up the shrimp from the floor and placed it gently back on the table. He looked at the manager who was reaching for his radio. He looked at the crowd who were pulling out their phones not to help but to record the downfall of an intruder. And then Julian smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a wolf watching a lamb walk willingly into the slaughterhouse. He reached into his inner pocket, ignoring the sauce that smeared against his hand. Victoria flinched. He has a weapon! She shrieked, jumping back. He is reaching for a gun. Security, stop him! But Julian didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out his phone. It was vibrating. The screen lit up with a name that made the floor manager freeze in his tracks. It wasn't the police. It wasn't security. It was Preston Sterling. Julian tapped the screen and put the call on speaker, placing the phone gently on the table amidst the broken glass and spilled wine. The voice on the other end was frantic, desperate, and loud enough for Victoria to hear clearly. Mr. Thorne. Mr. Thorne, thank God you picked up. I am at the entrance. Please tell me you are still there. Please tell me you haven't left yet. I have the papers. I have everything. My entire life is in your hands. The room went dead silent. Victoria's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Julian leaned forward toward the phone, his eyes never leaving Victoria's terrified face. I am here, Preston, but there seems to be a problem. Your wife just decided that I am not qualified to sit in your chair, and she made her point very clearly with a bottle of your best Cabernet. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Then a strangled whisper came through the speaker. She did what? Julian stood up then. He rose to his full height, towering over Victoria, the wine and sauce dripping from his ruined suit like war paint. She threw me out, Preston, so I am leaving. And I am taking my $1.5 billion with me. Preston Sterling burst through the double mahogany doors of the ballroom like a man running from a fire. His tuxedo was damp with sweat, and his eyes darted frantically around the room. He was $500 million in debt, and 89 minutes away from losing his grandfather's legacy. He needed Julian Thorne. He needed the man from Titan Ventures to sign the check that would stop the bleeding. But he didn't see a savior. He saw his wife. Victoria stood by the head table, trembling like a leaf in a storm. Her face was buried in her hands, and her shoulders shook with what looked like sobbing. And standing over her was a black man in a ruined white suit. Preston didn't think. He didn't analyze. He didn't ask questions. The stress of the failing company and the desperation of the night boiled over into blind protective rage. He saw a threat, and he needed to eliminate it. He rushed forward, pushing past waiters and guests. "Victoria," he shouted. "Victoria, what happened?" Victoria looked up. Her eyes were dry, but she forced a fresh wave of tears the moment she saw her husband. She pointed a shaking finger at Julian. "Preston, help me." He grabbed me. He touched me. The lie slipped from her lips as easily as breathing. He tried to force himself on me, Preston. He spilled wine on himself and then tried to wipe it off on my dress. He is crazy. He is a predator. Preston turned to Julian. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He didn't see a businessman. He didn't see a human being. He saw a target. "You." Preston roared. "You daring to touch my wife." Julian stood his ground. He didn't back away. He didn't raise his hands in surrender. He looked Preston dead in the eye. "Mr. Sterling, I suggest you ask your wife exactly what happened before you do something you cannot undo." "I do not need to ask anything," Preston spat. "I see a thug in a cheap suit harassing a lady." He turned to the perimeter of the room where the private security team was watching uncertainly. "Security, get over here. What am I paying you for? Get this animal off my floor. Break his legs if you have to, but get him out." The command hung in the air. Break his legs. It wasn't a request to escort a guest out. It was an order for violence. It was a declaration that Julian's body had no value. 3 security guards materialized from the shadows. They were massive men with necks as thick as tree trunks and earpieces coiled behind their ears. They didn't assess the situation. They didn't ask for Julian's side of the story. They heard the billionaire owner give an order, and they executed it. They swarmed Julian. The first guard grabbed Julian's right arm and twisted it violently behind his back. The shoulder joint popped audibly. Julian hissed in pain, but kept his jaw locked tight. The second guard kicked the back of Julian's knee, forcing him down. Julian hit the marble floor hard. His glasses skittered across the tiles. "Stay down!" the guard screamed, pressing a knee into Julian's spine. "Stop resisting." Julian wasn't resisting. He was lying flat on the ground with 300 pounds of pressure on his back. His cheek was pressed into the puddle of wine and cocktail sauce that Victoria had created. The cold liquid seeped into his ear. From the floor, Julian saw shoes. Shiny black loafers. Diamond-encrusted heels. The shoes of the elite watching a public execution with mild amusement. But at the table directly to his left, there was a different pair of shoes. Sneakers, stylish high tops, and a phone. Jasmine clicked the Go Live button on her screen. She was 24 years old, an independent journalist who had been sneaking into galas like this for years to expose the rot beneath the glamour. She had 500,000 followers who trusted her to tell the truth. She angled her phone down, capturing the brutal scene in high definition. "Are you seeing this?" Jasmine whispered into her microphone, her voice trembling with rage. "That is Preston Sterling, CEO of Sterling Corp. He just ordered his goons to attack a black guest. No questions asked. No police called. Just violence." The view count on her screen started at 500. Then it jumped to 2,000. Then 10,000. The comments rolled in faster than she could read them. Is that the Sterling guy from the news? Look at how they are holding him. He isn't even fighting back. Share this right now. This is assault. On the floor, Julian struggled to breathe. The weight on his back was crushing his lungs. He turned his head slightly, trying to make eye contact with Preston, who was standing above him, adjusting his cufflinks. Preston, Julian wheezed. Shut up. The guard slammed Julian's head back down onto the tiles. Preston. Julian tried again, his voice strained but steady. This is a mistake, a $1.5 billion mistake. Preston laughed. It was a cruel, nervous sound. You think you are worth money. You are nothing. You are a stain on my floor. Preston looked around the room, addressing the shocked investors and partners. He needed to spin this. He needed to look like a strong leader protecting his domain. I apologize, everyone, Preston announced, his voice booming. We have a zero-tolerance policy for harassment. Sometimes the trash blows in from the alley and you have to take it out yourself. He grabbed a linen napkin from the table. He wiped his sweaty palms on it. Then, with a look of utter disdain, he balled up the napkin and threw it at Julian. The napkin landed on Julian's head, covering his hair like a shroud. We are just clearing the room for our guest of honor. Preston continued, lying through his teeth because he still believed the Titan Ventures representative was coming. We are expecting a very important partner from Titan Ventures any minute now. And I want everything perfect for him. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. Preston was beating the very man he was waiting for. He was destroying the only person who could save him. Julian closed his eyes for a second. He memorized the pain in his shoulder. He memorized the smell of the floor polish. He memorized the sound of Preston's laughter. Pain is temporary, he told himself. Bankruptcy is forever. Victoria stepped forward. She wasn't satisfied yet. Seeing Julian on the floor wasn't enough. She needed to mark him. She needed to degrade him so thoroughly that he would never dare to look her in the eye again. She walked up to where Julian lay pinned. She looked down at his shoes. They were Italian leather hand-stitched worth $3,000. But to her, they looked like stolen goods. Nice shoes. Victoria sneered. She lifted her foot. She was wearing a stiletto with a razor-sharp heel. I bet you stole them from your boss, didn't you? She didn't wait for an answer. She gathered saliva in her mouth. She looked at the man who held the fate of her family in his hands, and she spat. The glob of spit landed right on the toe of Julian's shoe. Disgusting, she muttered. Then she kicked his foot hard with her heel, scratching the leather. Get him out of here. Throw him in the dumpster out back where he belongs. The guards hauled Julian up. They dragged him toward the exit, his feet barely touching the ground. His white suit was ruined. His face was smeared with sauce and wine. He looked broken. But as they dragged him past Jasmine's table, Julian looked directly into the camera lens. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like a judge delivering a death sentence. The view count hit 50,000. Preston Sterling turned to his wife and kissed her on the cheek, oblivious to the fact that his digital execution had just begun. Honey, you were so brave, Preston said. I was just protecting our standards, Victoria replied, smoothing her dress. Neither of them noticed the phone vibrating on the table amidst the spilled wine. The phone Julian had left behind. It lit up with a notification. Transfer canceled. Titan Ventures has withdrawn the offer. The spiral had begun, and they were already dead. They just didn't know it yet. Wait. Julian's voice cut through the chaos like a razor blade. He wasn't struggling against the 300 pounds of muscle pinning his arms. He wasn't kicking. He was simply stating a fact. The head of security, a man named Miller, with a scar running through his eyebrow, tightened his grip on Julian's wrist. He was used to people begging. He was used to people screaming for lawyers or police. He wasn't used to a man being dragged toward a service exit, speaking with the calm authority of a king. In the inside pocket of my jacket, Julian said, his breath hitching slightly from the pain in his shoulder. My phone is ringing. Miller ignored him. He shoved Julian forward, his heavy boots scuffing the marble floor. Shut up, Miller grunted. You can make your calls from the alley. It is Senator Davis. The name hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Miller stopped. His boots squeaked to a halt. Every security guard in New York knew Senator Davis. He wasn't just a politician. He was the most powerful man in the state, the guest of honor for tonight's gala, and the man who signed the permits for the security firm Miller worked for. Julian turned his head, looking Miller dead in the eye. He is calling me right now, probably to ask why I am not sitting at the table he reserved for me. If you drag me out that door, I will miss this call. And when the senator asks me later why I didn't answer, I will tell him it was because Miller from Centurion Security broke my arm. Miller's grip loosened. Just a fraction. Doubt crept into his eyes. He looked at the ruined suit. He looked at the wine stains. But then he looked at Julian's face. It wasn't the face of a gatecrasher. It was the face of someone who played golf with senators. Preston Sterling saw the hesitation. He saw his security team pausing, and panic flared in his chest. He needed this man gone. Every second Julian remained in the room was a second that the humiliation of his wife continued. "What are you doing?" Preston screamed, his face turning a blotchy purple. "Why have you stopped? He says the senator is calling him." Miller said, his voice uncertain. Preston stomped forward, his tuxedo shoes clicking aggressively on the floor. "He is lying. He is a con artist." "That is probably his accomplice calling to see if the coast is clear to steal the silverware." Preston pointed a shaking finger at the pocket where the phone buzzed rhythmically against Julian's ribs. "Smash it," Preston ordered. "Take the phone and smash it into 1,000 pieces. Then throw him out." Miller looked at Preston. Then he looked at Julian. He was caught between the man signing his paycheck and a potential political nightmare. "Do it!" Preston roared. "Or you are fired." Miller reached into Julian's pocket. His rough hand fished out the device. It was a sleek black smartphone, no case, vibrating with urgency. The screen was lit up. The caller ID didn't say accomplice. It didn't say mom. It said Senator Davis, private line. Miller froze. He stared at the screen as if it were a bomb. "Answer it," Julian commanded. It wasn't a request. Miller looked at Preston, who was now close enough to see the name on the screen. Preston's eyes widened. For a second, the rage faltered, replaced by confusion. "Put it on speaker," Julian said softly. "Let Mr. Sterling hear who his wife just assaulted." Miller, moving like a man in a trance, tapped the green icon and hit the speaker button. He held the phone up in the silent space between the three men. The connection clicked open. Julian. The voice that came through the tiny speaker was unmistakable. It was the deep, resonant baritone that had given speeches on national television for 2 decades. It was Senator Davis. And he sounded friendly. He sounded familiar. "Julian, where are you?" The senator asked, his tone warm but urgent. "I am standing here with Preston Sterling's lawyers. We have the papers ready for the transfer. Preston told me he needs this money wired before the Asian markets open, or his company goes under." The words hit Preston Sterling like a physical blow to the stomach. $1.5 billion. The transfer. Preston felt the blood drain from his face so fast it made him dizzy. His heart, which had been hammering with rage, skipped a beat and then started pounding with terrified realization. He looked at the phone. He looked at Miller, who was now slowly backing away, releasing Julian's arm as if it were red-hot iron. And then Preston looked at Julian, really looked at him. He saw the calm intelligence in the eyes. He saw the posture that remained upright even after being dragged. He saw the expensive watch on the wrist that Miller had been twisting. "Oh my God," Preston mouthed, no sound coming out. The senator continued, oblivious to the chaos he was broadcasting into. "I tried to find you at table 1, but it's empty. I hope you didn't get held up. We need your signature on the Titan Ventures agreement in the next 10 minutes. Preston is sweating bullets over here. He thinks you aren't coming." Julian reached out with his free hand. He took the phone from Miller's trembling fingers. He didn't look at the guard. He didn't look at the crowd. He kept his eyes locked on Preston Sterling. He adjusted his glasses, wiping a smear of cocktail sauce from the frame with his thumb. "I am here, Senator." Julian said, his voice smooth, calm, and deadly. "I arrived 10 minutes ago. I went to table 1 just as we discussed." Preston started to shake his head. He held up his hands in a silent plea. "Please. Please don't say it. Please. But Julian continued. However, it seems there has been a change of plans. I was just in the process of being escorted out of the building. Escorted out. The senator's voice sharpened. By whom? Did security not recognize you? No, Senator. It wasn't a security error. Julian took a step toward Preston. The billionaire shrank back, looking small and withered in his expensive tuxedo. Mrs. Sterling felt that I wasn't suitable for the atmosphere. She and her husband have been very hospitable. They even offered me a drink. Julian ran a hand down the front of his jacket, his fingers coming away wet with red wine. Though I must say, serving a vintage Cabernet by throwing it in my face is a new tradition for me. On the other end of the line, there was a stunned silence. Throwing it. The senator's voice dropped an octave. Julian, are you telling me that Preston Sterling's wife assaulted you? Preston couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. He felt the weight of the bank loans, the angry shareholders, the impending bankruptcy all crashing down on him at once. He had been waiting for a savior named Julian Thorne. He had expected an older white man. He had expected someone who looked like him. He never imagined that the black man his wife had just called trash was the only person in the world who could save him. Preston opened his mouth to speak. He wanted to scream, to apologize, to beg. He wanted to fall to his knees and lick the wine off the floor if it would fix this. But before he could make a sound, a hand snatched the phone from Julian's grip. It was Victoria. She had been watching from a few feet away, her anger simmering her mind, unable to process the turn of events. She saw Preston's fear, but she didn't understand it. She saw the security guards backing down, and it infuriated her. In her world, she was never wrong. In her world, consequences were things that happened to other people. She glared at the phone in her hand, her eyes wild with a toxic mix of entitlement and stupidity. "Who is this?" she shrieked into the receiver. "Who are you, and why are you helping this con artist?" Preston lunged forward. "Victoria, no. Give me the phone. Get away from me, Preston." She shoved her husband aside with surprising strength. "He is tricking you. Can't you see that?" She turned her fury on Julian, waving the phone in his face like a weapon. "You think you are clever, don't you? You think you can come into my party, sit at my table, and then use some voice-changing app to scare my husband?" She laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "I know what this is. It is AI. It is a recording. You probably have a friend hiding in the bathroom making these voices. You are a fraud. A dirty, lying fraud." Julian looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Mrs. Sterling, that is Senator Davis." "Liar!" Victoria screamed. She raised her hand. The movement was fast practiced. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think about the cameras recording her. She didn't think about the 50,000 people watching on the live stream. She only thought about her own rage and the need to silence the man who was making her look foolish. She slapped him. It was the second time that night. The sound was a sharp crack that echoed off the high ceilings. "How dare you speak to me? How dare you try to use technology to scam us?" She turned to the phone, screaming into the speaker. "And whoever you are on the other end, I am calling the police. You are going to jail for fraud. Do you hear me? You are going to rot in a cell with this animal." Preston finally reached her. He grabbed her shoulders, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Victoria, stop. Stop it right now." He looked at her, his eyes wide with horror. "That is not a recording, Victoria. That is Julian Thorne. That is the CEO of Titan Ventures. That is the man with the money." Victoria froze. She looked at her husband. She saw the terror in his eyes. She saw the absolute certainty. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, he can't be. Look at him, Preston. Look at his hair. Look at his skin. He isn't a CEO. He is nobody." Preston ripped the phone from her hand. He put it to his ear, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. Senator, please." She didn't know. "She is not well. We are under a lot of stress." The voice on the other end was ice cold. It was the voice of a man who destroyed careers before breakfast. "Preston, the senator said. Is Julian Thorne still standing there? Yes. Yes, he is right here. I am so sorry. Put him back on. Preston handed the phone back to Julian. He did it with both hands like he was offering a sacred relic. Julian took the phone. He didn't wipe his cheek where she had slapped him. He let the red mark stay there, a beacon of her guilt. I am here, Senator. Julian, the senator said. Do you want me to send the police? No. Julian said, his eyes locking with Preston's. Not yet. Then what do you want to do about the deal? The papers are right here. Julian looked at Preston. He saw a man who was already broken. He saw a man who knew exactly what was coming. Then he looked at Victoria. She was still standing there, defiant, her chin raised, refusing to believe the truth, even as it stared her in the face. She still looked at him like he was dirt. She still believed that her blood was blue and his was worthless. Julian spoke into the phone, his voice clear and final. Burn them, Senator. Burn the papers. Titan Ventures is out. The double doors at the top of the grand staircase burst open with a violence that shook the crystal sconces on the walls. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom, drawing every eye upward. Senator Davis did not walk down the stairs. He ran. Beside him was Eleanor Vance, the chairwoman of the gala, clutching her pearls, her face a mask of absolute horror. Behind them trailed a phalanx of lawyers and aides, their briefcases swinging wildly as they scrambled to keep up with the senator's furious pace. They descended upon the scene like a tactical team. Julian stood amidst the wreckage of the evening, the red wine drying sticky on his skin, the cocktail sauce smearing the lapel of his ruined white suit. He looked like a warrior who had just survived an ambush. Victoria was still screaming into the void, her face twisted, her hand raised as if to strike again. Preston was frozen, the phone clutched in his hand like a grenade that had already had the pin pulled. Senator Davis reached the bottom of the stairs and shoved a security guard out of his way. He didn't look at Preston. He didn't look at Victoria. He went straight to Julian. The most powerful politician in the state, a man who dined with presidents, stopped in front of the young black CEO and bowed his head. It was a gesture of profound submission and apology. Mr. Thorne. The senator's voice shook with genuine rage and embarrassment. On behalf of the city of New York, on behalf of this entire organization, I am so incredibly sorry. What the hell happened here? Julian looked at the senator. He didn't speak immediately. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket. The movement made the security guards flinch, but they didn't dare move. Not with the senator standing there. Julian pulled out a silk handkerchief. It was monogrammed with his initials. He slowly, methodically wiped a smear of cocktail sauce from his cheek. He folded the handkerchief, now stained red, and placed it back in his pocket. Then he reached into his inner pocket again. Preston flinched. Victoria gasped. But Julian pulled out a pen. It was a Mont Blanc black resin with gold trim. It was the pen he had brought to sign the deal, the pen that was supposed to save the Sterling Empire. I brought this pen tonight to sign a check, Senator, Julian said, his voice calm, carrying the weight of a judge passing sentence. I came here in good faith. I came here because I believed that Sterling Corp had value. I believed that despite the financial mismanagement, the core technology was sound. He turned the pen over in his fingers. The light caught the gold nib. I was prepared to inject $1.5 billion of capital into this family's legacy. I was prepared to save 5,000 jobs. Julian looked at Preston. But it seems I made a miscalculation. I assumed I was dealing with businessmen. Instead, I find myself dealing with bigots who throw wine at their investors because they cannot conceive of a black man having power. Preston made a noise, a whimper deep in his throat. He took a step forward, his hands trembling. Julian, please, let me explain. She didn't know. I didn't know. We can fix this. Julian ignored him. He looked at the pen one last time. There is nothing to fix, Preston. The ink in this pen is for contracts. It is not for signing deals with people who treat human beings like garbage. With a sudden violent motion, Julian snapped the pen in half. The crack sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. Ink exploded from the cartridge, splattering onto the floor, mixing with the spilled wine. A black stain joining the red one. He threw the broken pieces at Preston's feet. The deal is dead. Preston stared at the broken pen. Ink leaked onto his patent leather shoes. The reality of what just happened crashed into him with the force of a freight train. He looked up at Julian, his eyes wide, terrified, pleading. "Julian," Preston's voice cracked. "You can't do this. You know the timeline. You know the numbers." Julian stepped closer. He invaded Preston's personal space, forcing the billionaire to look up at him. "I know the numbers better than you do, Preston." Julian checked his watch. It was a Patek Philippe worth more than the car Victoria had driven here in. "It is 9 o'clock. At 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, exactly 11 hours from now, your bridge loan with the Deutsche Bank matures. You owe them $500 million. The crowd gasped. The financial details of Sterling Corp were supposed to be private. Julian was airing the dirty laundry to the entire room. "If you do not pay that $500 million by 8:00 a.m., the bank triggers the default clause. They seize your assets. They seize your headquarters. They seize this building we are standing in right now. And most importantly, they seize your personal estates." Julian's voice dropped lower, colder. "I was your only liquidity. I was the only person on Wall Street willing to touch your toxic debt because I thought you had potential." Preston's knees gave out. It wasn't a figure of speech. His legs simply stopped working. He collapsed onto the marble floor, landing in the puddle of wine and ink. He grabbed the hem of Julian's ruined jacket. "Julian, please. I am begging you. My wife, she is unwell. She is under stress. She didn't mean it. She sees a doctor. Please don't destroy us because she made a mistake. Think of the employees. Think of the 5,000 families." Julian looked down at the man groveling at his feet. He felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just cold resolve. He reached down and peeled Preston's fingers off his jacket one by one. "Do not use your employees as a shield for your wife's racism." Julian stepped back, wiping his hand on his pants. "Your wife didn't make a mistake, Preston. A mistake is forgetting a name. A mistake is spilling a drink." He pointed at Victoria, who was standing frozen, her face pale as a ghost. "Calling me an animal is not a mistake. Ordering security to break my legs is not a mistake. That is a choice. That is a worldview. And you stood there and watched it happen. You ordered your men to attack me. You enabled her." Julian looked around the room, making eye contact with the investors, the bankers, the partners who were watching Sterling Corp die in real time. "Racism is expensive, Preston. Tonight the price is $1.5 billion. And you just paid it in full." Victoria finally moved. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a dawn of horror. She realized that the money was actually leaving. She realized that the man she had spat on was the man who owned her mortgage. She lunged forward, grabbing Preston's arm, trying to pull him up. "Get up, Preston. Don't beg him. He is enjoying this. Can't you see he is enjoying this?" She glared at Julian, her eyes manic. "You think you can ruin us? My father built this city. We have friends. We have connections. We don't need your dirty money." Senator Davis stepped forward then. He looked at Victoria with a mixture of disgust and pity. "Mrs. Sterling, be quiet. You have done enough damage." Victoria recoiled as if slapped. "Who are you to tell me to be quiet? This is my party." "It was your party," the senator said coldly. "Now it is a crime scene." Before Victoria could scream again, a movement on the stage caught everyone's attention. Jasmine, the young influencer who had been recording the entire assault, had moved. While the room was focused on the confrontation, she had quietly slipped up to the audio-visual booth at the side of the stage. She held her phone up to the AV technician. The tech, a young black man who had watched the entire assault with clenched fists, nodded at her. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't ask his manager. He took the cable Jasmine offered and plugged it into her phone. He hit a button on the console. Behind the stage, the massive LED wall usually reserved for charity videos and donor lists flickered to life. It was 50 feet wide and 20 feet tall. The image that appeared was crystal clear. It was 4K video. It showed Victoria Sterling. Her face twisted in hate, holding a goblet of wine. The audio boomed through the concert hall speakers, amplified to a deafening volume. "Get up right now, you filth." The crowd watched in stunned silence as the giant screen showed the wine hitting Julian's face. They heard the splash. Then they heard the slur. "Go back to the ghetto where you belong." Victoria stared at the screen. She saw herself. She saw the ugly, distorted rage on her own face. It was like looking into a mirror of her own soul, and it was hideous. Then the video cut to Preston. "Break his legs if you have to, but get him out." The order echoed through the ballroom. "Break his legs." It repeated. "Break his legs." The investors in the room, the men and women who held Sterling Corp stock, who sat on the board, who held the other loans, recoiled in horror. They weren't just seeing a fight. They were seeing a liability. They were seeing a PR nuclear bomb that would destroy anyone standing near it. Preston looked at the screen. He saw himself ordering violence against a man who had done nothing but sit in a chair. He saw the brutality of his security guards. He saw Julian on the floor not fighting back, maintaining his dignity, while Preston acted like a warlord. Phones started ringing. It wasn't just one phone. It was hundreds. The distinct ping of notifications began to fill the room like a swarm of locusts. Ping, 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 ping. It was the sound of the market reacting. Even though the markets were closed, the after-hours trading platforms were live. The video Jasmine was streaming had gone viral instantly. The algorithm picked it up. The financial blogs picked it up. Wall Street picked it up. A banker standing near the front looked at his phone and gasped. Sterling Corp just dropped 20%. Another notification, 30%. It is in free fall. Preston scrambled for his own phone in his pocket. His hands were slippery with sweat and ink. He unlocked the screen. His brokerage app was open. The line that represented his family's wealth, a line that had been holding steady on the promise of the Titan deal, was nosediving. It was a vertical red line pointing straight to hell. "My stock," Preston whispered. "It's crashing." He looked at Julian. "Make it stop. Please. Tell them you are still in. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will give you anything. I will give you more equity. I will give you a seat on the board." Julian adjusted his cuffs. He looked at the giant screen where Victoria was currently spitting on his shoe in high definition. "I don't want a seat on your board, Preston. I don't want your equity." Julian turned to leave. "I want to watch it burn." And as he walked away, the sound of the stock alerts pinging in the room grew louder and louder, a digital requiem for a dying empire. The spiral was complete. The destruction was total, and Julian Thorne walked out the front door, leaving the Sterlings drowning in the wreckage of their own hate. The realization hit Victoria Sterling like a physical slap to the face. The adrenaline of her rage evaporated instantly, leaving behind a cold, hollow terror that settled deep in her bones. The numbers echoed in her mind. $1.5 billion. Gone. The lifeline was cut. The safety net was burned, and she was the one holding the match. She looked at Julian Thorne not as an intruder anymore, but as a mountain of gold she had just set on fire. The arrogance that had fueled her for 40 years dissolved into desperate, pathetic panic. She rushed toward him, her expensive red gown swishing around her legs. She reached out with the hem of her dress, grabbing the silk fabric in her shaking hands, and tried to wipe the red wine stain from Julian's white jacket. "I can fix this," Victoria stammered, her voice high and frantic. "Look, I am cleaning it. It is coming out. We can get you a new suit. We can get you 10 new suits. Just please tell them you are joking. Tell them the deal is still on." She scrubbed at his chest, frantically smearing the cocktail sauce and wine further into the fabric, ruining her own dress in the process. It was a humiliating display. The queen of New York society on her knees, trying to act like a maid to save her fortune. Julian looked down at her. He didn't move away immediately. He let the room see her desperation. He let the cameras capture the woman who had spat on him, now trying to polish him like a tarnished trophy. Then he moved. He placed a hand on her shoulder and pushed her away. It wasn't violent, but it was firm. It was the way one might push away a begging dog. "Don't touch me," Julian said, his voice cutting through her babbling. Victoria stumbled back, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. "I am sorry," she wept. "I am so sorry. I didn't know." Julian brushed off the spot she had touched. Your apology smells just like your character, Mrs. Sterling. It is rotten. You are only sorry because you looked at my bank account. You aren't sorry for the hate in your heart. You are sorry for the hole in your wallet." Before Victoria could respond, the heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open again. But this time it wasn't a waiter. It wasn't a senator. It was the NYPD. 6 officers marched into the room, their faces grim. They weren't the beat cops who stood outside for crowd control. These were detectives. And they weren't walking toward Julian. They walked straight to Preston Sterling. Preston Sterling. The lead detective announced, his badge flashing under the chandeliers. "You are under arrest." Preston stared at them, his mind unable to process another disaster. "Arrest? For what? I am the victim here. This man ruined my gala. You are under arrest for assault and battery based on the video evidence currently circulating globally," the detective said, snapping handcuffs onto Preston's wrists. "And for securities fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement." The room gasped. This was the secret Julian had been holding. This was the leverage he had found during his due diligence. Julian stepped forward, addressing the crowd. "Did you think I would invest $1 billion without looking at the books, Preston?" Julian pulled a folded document from his inner pocket, the only thing that had stayed dry. "I found the offshore accounts. I found the shell companies you were using to siphon money from the employee pension fund to pay for your wife's jewelry and this party. I handed the file to the district attorney 3 hours ago." Preston's knees buckled. He wasn't just broke. He was a criminal. He had stolen from his own workers to maintain the illusion of wealth, and now the illusion was shattered. Victoria screamed as a female officer grabbed her arm. "And you, Mrs. Sterling," the officer said, spinning her around, "you are under arrest for assault battery and filing a false police report. We have the audio of your 911 call claiming there was a gunman. That is a felony." "No," Victoria shrieked, thrashing against the cuffs. "You can't do this. I am Victoria Sterling. I own this city. You own nothing," Julian said quietly. The chaos in the room escalated into a frenzy. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest noise in the world. It was the sound of a dynasty ending. Phones were still pinging in pockets all around the room. The financial world moves at the speed of light, and the news of the arrest had hit the wires instantly. A banker near the stage shouted out the numbers. "Sterling Corp is down 60%. Trading has been halted. It is a bloodbath." Preston's phone, which had fallen to the floor, buzzed violently. It was on speaker mode from a previous call, and a voice boomed out. "This is the chairman of the board. Preston, are you there?" Preston tried to lean toward the phone, but the detective held him back. "I am here," Preston choked out. "You are fired, effective immediately." The chairman's voice was devoid of mercy. "The board has voted unanimously to remove you as CEO. We are cooperating fully with the federal investigation. Do not come to the office. Do not touch any files. You are finished." The line went dead. Preston slumped in the detective's grip, fired from the company his grandfather built, stripped of his title in front of the very people he tried to impress. Another man in a dark suit stepped forward from the crowd. He was a representative from Deutsche Bank. "Mr. Sterling, since the stock has collapsed and you are under federal indictment, the bank is invoking the immediate repayment clause. We are seizing the collateral." He looked around the lavish ballroom. "We are seizing this building. We are seizing your Hamptons estate. We are seizing your penthouse. And we are freezing all personal accounts effective 1 minute ago." It was total annihilation. In the span of 10 minutes, the Sterlings had gone from billionaires to homeless inmates. Victoria was weeping hysterically now, her makeup running in black streaks down her face, making her look like a grotesque mask of tragedy. She turned on her husband, her eyes filled with venom. "This is your fault," she screamed, spitting the words at Preston. "You told me to protect the brand. You told me to keep the trash out. Why didn't you tell me who he was? Why didn't you tell me he was the investor?" She looked at Julian, her eyes pleading for a logic that didn't exist. "If I had known you were a billionaire, I would have treated you like a king." Julian walked up to her. He stood close enough that she could smell the wine she had thrown on him. He looked her in the eye and delivered the final verdict. "That is your tragedy, Victoria. You think dignity has a price tag. You think respect is something you buy." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that roared in her ears. "You should have respected me because I am a human being, not because I am a billionaire." He signaled to the detectives, "Take them away." As the police dragged the screaming, cursing Sterlings out of the ballroom, the crowd didn't look away. They watched the fall of the Titans. They watched the Rolls-Royce waiting outside that would never take them home again. They watched the end of an era built on arrogance and the beginning of a new world built on consequences. 6 months later, the skyline of New York looked the same, but the landscape of power had shifted. A black town car pulled up to the curb of a modest diner in Queens. The door opened and Julian Thorne stepped out. He wasn't wearing a white suit today. He was dressed in a sharp navy business suit, impeccable and authoritative. He walked into the diner. It was lunchtime and the place was busy. The smell of grease and coffee hung in the air. He sat at a booth in the corner and opened a file on the table. The cover read Phoenix Industries. It was the new name of Sterling Corp. Julian had bought the assets for pennies on the dollar during the bankruptcy auction. He had gutted the toxicity. He had fired the cronies. And then he had done something the Sterlings never would have dreamed of. He had hired a new CEO. He looked at the photo in the file. It was a black woman with natural hair named Sarah Jenkins. 5 years ago, Preston Sterling had fired her for being too outspoken about diversity. Now she was running his grandfather's company, and profits were up 20% in the first quarter. She was brilliant, she was capable, and she was leading with empathy. Julian smiled. It was the best investment he had ever made. "Excuse me, honey, can you move your elbow? I need to wipe this table." The voice was tired, raspy, and familiar. Julian looked up. Standing there, holding a dirty rag and a spray bottle, was a woman in a stained pink uniform. Her hair was frizzy, pulled back in a messy bun. Her face was lined with exhaustion and bitterness. She wore no makeup. She wore no diamonds. It was Victoria Sterling. She was out on bail awaiting trial, but with her assets frozen and her friends abandoning her, she had to work. And this was the only place that would hire the most hated woman in New York. She sprayed the table next to him, wiping aggressively. A customer, a young man in a hoodie, complained, "Hey, watch it, you got cleaner on my fries." "Sorry," Victoria muttered, not making eye contact. "Just doing my job." She turned and saw Julian. She froze. The rag dropped from her hand. She looked at his suit. She looked at his watch. She looked at the file on the table with the Phoenix logo. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The shame was a physical weight crushing her into the linoleum floor. She remembered the wine. She remembered the spit. She remembered the feeling of power. Now she only felt the ache in her feet and the sting of harsh cleaning chemicals on her hands. Julian looked at her. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He didn't offer her money or pity. He simply looked at her, acknowledging her existence as a human being, something she had never done for him. Then he slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his sunglasses. He put them on, shielding his eyes. He tapped the table twice, a signal to himself that business was done. He stood up, leaving a $100 bill on the table for a cup of coffee he hadn't ordered. "Keep the change," Julian said softly. He walked past her, out the door and into the bright afternoon sun where his driver was waiting to take him to the headquarters of Phoenix Industries. Victoria stood there staring at the money. It was more than she made in 2 days. She started to cry silent tears that mixed with the grease on her face. The lesson had been learned. The price had been paid. Don't ever judge a book by its cover. And don't ever let prejudice blind you to the opportunity to save your own life. Because you never know who is sitting at the table until the cards are turned over. This story serves as a brutal reminder that prejudice is the most expensive liability one can carry. Victoria Sterling's arrogance didn't just stain a white suit, it incinerated a family dynasty. She looked at a black man and saw only her own bias, blinding herself to the reality that he was her only savior. The lesson is undeniable. Treat every human being with dignity, not because of their title, but because of their humanity. You never know when the person you try to crush is actually the one holding the keys to your future.